Welcome to Realizing Resilience, a podcast from the Connecticut Women's Consortium. We're not behavioral health professionals, but we're your gateway to real conversations with the experts. Each episode, we'll delve into the vast landscape of mental health, from personal stories to expert insights. Together, we'll bridge the gap between clinical expertise and personal experiences, connecting with diverse voices and perspectives. Join us for insightful conversations that demystify the world of mental health.
Shalyn Rose is a seasoned professional with a strong focus on substance use and addiction treatment. After earning her master's in social work from Fordham University in 2010, she gained experience at Rushford, working with adolescents in the PHP/IOP program, and later managing the outpatient clinic. In 2012, she became a licensed clinical social worker and expanded her career by joining Yale Psychiatric Inpatient while building her private practice, Supportive Solutions. Her interest in audit processes led her to collaborate with attorneys and consulting firms, becoming an advocate for thorough documentation and compliance.
Welcome back to Realizing Resilience. My name is Alana.
And I'm Marisa.
And today we have the pleasure of speaking with Shalyn Rose. So Shalyn, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
First and foremost, can you talk a little bit about what inspired you to offer training on clinical documentation and compliance and to become an advocate in that world?
Yes, the short answer is because I want to help clinicians protect their income. My documentation training is heavily focused on private practice. I'm sure a lot of this applies to agencies, but agencies have it's a whole different ballgame with different funders and whatnot. But in private practice, most people take insurance. And when you go into private practice, you, the owner, right? If you're a group or if it's just you're on your own, you're the owner, you are responsible for paying back any kind of money that an insurance company might come in and audit. So just to give you a little bit of background and how I got where I am, I started at the Rushford Center in Meriden as an intern doing PHP IOP with adolescents. In 2009, I got hired and I worked my way up. I got licensed, I became the lead clinician, I became the manager of the program, and when I became the manager, I was exposed to audits. I had to participate in them. Prior to that, I had really good training, and a lot of clinicians don't get good training. I got that. When I became a manager and I had to sit through these annual audits, I learned a lot. And then I was there for 7 years. I went off on my own into private practice. And when I was at an agency, if money was to get taken back, it's not coming from the employees, the clinicians, it's coming from the agency. But when you're in private practice, the money's coming from you. And I thought, wow, I feel like I know a lot. I've had good training. I've been part of audits. Now I'm on my own. I really want to step up my game more and learn more and offer my knowledge to clinicians to help them protect their income, because audits happen quite frequently, and I think clinicians don't think they're gonna maybe go through them, but they also don't necessarily know what they're doing, maybe think that they do or know that they don't, but they're not sure what to do. And the insurance companies don't really make the information easily accessible, if at all. And so I thought I really want to take what I know and share it and help people not have to pay back money, because it's happening. That was my inspiration. When I went into private practice and when I do my trainings, I always tell this because I just think it's funny. I've been in private practice for 10 years. It took me 7 years to finally sit down and do it and apply to the NSAW, get the approval to offer CEUs. And then I started doing the training September 2022. And November 2022, I got the call from Husky that I was getting audited. So it's scary, but the silver lining there was it gave me a lot of insight into what you go through when you get an audit. So that was my inspiration.
And I'm assuming there's not any required courses that you need to take when going into private practice about how to process insurance.
Well, to rewind, there's no training when you go to school for your master's, which I truly believe there should be a course on documentation. And then when you go into the field, you can only hope that who you're getting taught from knows what they're doing. But then when you go into private practice, no one is saying, you enroll with insurance and you get the approval, but it doesn't come with a packet of exactly what needs to go in documentation. There are manuals and there are There is criteria out there, but it's super vague. So no. So everyone's going into private practice, and that's really the trend right now. A lot of people are going into private practice, and they're just going in doing what they have learned, and it may or may not be the right way.
Yeah, I'm sure that can be daunting and difficult for someone to try and do that for the first time. Is that kind of the most challenging aspect of the documentation and compliance you've encountered, or is there something even bigger than that you have struggled with?
The most challenging piece is, right, you go into private practice, you're seeing your client. That's what we're there for. None of us like the documentation part, but it's 50% of the job. And you go to do your notes and you're just not exactly sure what you should be including in them. Now, there are EHRs, electronic health records, which a lot of people have. Some people just do them what we call on paper. They might have a template. And when you purchase an EHR, like therapy notes, is which we use, or simple practice, those are the two big ones, you assume that it's set up in a way where it's 100% compliant, but that's not the case. I haven't come across an EHR that is, flawless. So clinicians, based on kind of, I don't want to say intuition or gut, but it's a lot of based on the thousands of people I've trained. They go in and they're just, documenting what they think they're supposed to be saying, and that's not the case. So I guess the challenge is they're just doing what they think they're supposed to be doing.
How have you been able to overcome that in your practice and kind of empower others to do the same?
So I have all that knowledge and training, right, from Rushford and just getting good supervision when I was, first starting out in the field. When I went into private practice myself, I started taking a lot of trainings myself. Like I knew a lot, and I thought I was a little bit ahead of probably most. But I thought to myself, let me just go further. So I took there's a lot of trainings out there, and I took as many as I could. And then I hired an attorney that works with a consultant. He works a lot with audit. This consultant firm works a lot with people who are getting audited. So like they have a lot of knowledge. So I worked with them to gain even more knowledge. I'm constantly doing research and reading up on things that have changed and continuing to do trainings. I keep educating myself because things do change. And within my practice, and I tell this to people, clinicians, when I interview them, like the best word that I come across, and I could probably figure out a better word, but what I tell them is I'm very strict when it comes to documentation, that I'm a documentation trainer, that I've gone through my own audit, that your notes will be audited. So we do internal audits periodically. So my team's really very good at documentation because I've made them go through, they all have to go through my training when they start. And then we do like annual refreshers. And like I said, periodic audit. So, we just continue to look at their charts to make sure, because there are a lot of components that can't be missed. I mean, if you miss some, and it's easy to miss because there's a lot, and then you go through an audit, the money could get taken back, and that's just not a good feeling. We did the job, we saw the clients, right? We did the best we could with our notes. But things get missed. So I'm just constantly training them, auditing charts. And I have to say, like, I'm really proud of them. Like, they're doing a great job. And for, other groups, so I've trained. At one point, I was doing a bi-monthly training. I stepped it down to, I offer once a month virtually. And now I've been, I did my first women's consortium training back in August, and I have the one coming up in January, so it sounds like it's going to be quarterly. I recommend, same thing that I do, ongoing training, ongoing audits. Don't just assume that your clinicians, just because they did the note, that it's compliant in content of the note.
And the rules are kind of ever changing too,
Yeah.
right? I know like with HIPAA, they're adding new things all the time. So I imagine periodic training is important in that regard too.
Yeah, the rules are changing. And, everything I've learned and every training I've taken, I've been told that the way you should document is based on the Medicare and Medicaid standards because they're the strictest. And if you document based on their criteria, you'll pass all other audits. I have found a few caveats to that, where there's insurance companies that there are a few little different things, but there are things that change, that get added, that they want. And, I'm on every list to get an email notification from every insurance, but they're not emailing and saying, hey, this is a new change. It's like it's like a scavenger hunt to find the information. So people don't know.
And so you mentioned you offered a training with us in August, and we'll do another in January. In the training in January, you're going to explain a little bit about the golden thread process. If you could just explain a little bit about what that is, and then maybe go into detail about what your training will be like in terms of teaching style and activities.
Yeah, so the golden thread, and every time I do a training, and the golden thread's on like the third slide, it's like at the beginning or third page of my slides. I always ask people to raise their hand who has not heard of it this term. And at least half of every group says, I've never heard of this. And it's shocking because this is such a simple concept that should be spoken about, should be taught in school. And when I explain it, I think it clicks for people. When I learned of it, and honestly, I only learned of it a handful of years ago. It's just not a concept that gets spoken about. So things clicked for me too. The golden thread means that there should be a consistent presentation of clinical information throughout your documentation. So what does that mean? When we first meet a client for an assessment, also known as a biopsychosocial assessment or intake, we are assessing, we're gathering information, we're determining level of care, duration of care, type of care, and is there a diagnosis here? And if you're billing insurance, there has to be a diagnosis. So if in this intake, at the end of it, let's say I determine that this client presents with the criteria for generalized anxiety disorder. And on my intake note, that's what I document. I say that they have GAD, we call it. The next document that you do in a chart is a treatment plan. The treatment plan should be consistent with a GAD diagnosis. And then when you meet with the client, that's what you should be working on, and your notes should reflect that GAD diagnosis and what the goals are, the objectives. And I always say this in my trainings too. And because I know I was guilty of this when I first started in private practice. You do that intake, right? And you say you have generalized anxiety disorder. Then you meet them the next week, you do your treatment plan, and well, your treatment plan, you put depression on there with depression goals and objectives. And then in your notes, you might start talking about whatever, presenting for the client, but you might start talking about trauma and ADHD. Well, you broke the golden thread. It has to be consistent. You have to, if you're giving them a diagnosis of anxiety, because that's why they're there, your treatment plan, which informs care, should talk about anxiety, and then your notes should be doing the same. Now, at any point, the focus of treatment could change. Something else could surface like trauma, and your notes start reflecting trauma work. You have to remember to go back and update your treatment plan so that it's reflecting trauma. So it should be a consistent pattern of clinical information.
That's much simpler than it seems from the name.
Right? It's so simple when you explain it that way. There's a concept around it, and duh. There's like a duh moment. Like that makes complete sense, but oftentimes there's a disconnect for people when they're doing their notes. They're just not thinking about it that way. And money, can get taken back from an insurance company if you're breaking that golden thread. So it's really important to remember, there needs to be some consistency amongst the chart.
Yeah, and it seems like it's a lot of just tracing your steps, so it's easy for everyone involved here, for you, for, if make sure you're treating the client for what they're even there for, and then if anyone needs to check your stuff. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, oftentimes I think what happens is, you do your intake, it's a note in your chart. You do your treatment plan, it's a document in your chart, and then you meet with the client every week. And there's this saying in our field, like, you meet a client where they're at. We meet you where they're at. So they're going to come and they're going to talk about whatever they want to talk about. And maybe it's not necessarily about anxiety that day, but we have to figure out a way to connect with what they're saying and anxiety and bringing it into our note. So it's just what clinicians don't do is go back frequently and look at that intake. We have huge caseloads, right? If you have your 30, 40, 50 clients, to remember what everyone's working on, it is important to go back and look at the treatment plan to remind yourself of what we're working on, because that's what informs care. So it's so easy to get lost on paper. It's hard. What happens, I always say, what happens in a session is hard to translate onto paper. It's not an easy skill. It takes practice.
I'm sure. And even just the thought of, okay, now I need to write all these things down. What did we even talk about in this last session?
Yeah, that's another thing that, it's the insurance companies make it very vague in their criteria of when notes are due. Everyone practices a little bit differently, has a different opinion. Best practice is obviously to do it as soon as possible because you're going to forget. My practice, my policy is within 72 hours that they have to get their notes done. But, when you have that many clients on your caseload, it is very easy to forget.
Do you have any advice that you would want to give clinicians who may feel overwhelmed by the complexity of the documentation requirements?
Take my training or a training. And more than one training. I've learned a little bit of, something different from all the trainings I've taken, but don't just make an assumption that you know what you're doing. Ongoing training, ongoing education, reading online, going on the website, the insurance company websites to see what you can find, but really take some trainings. Don't just assume, because even though I went into private practice with what I believe was a really good base of knowledge, I learned a lot from everything I did after that to get to the point where I feel really confident in what I'm teaching people. So do training and know that an audit can come. Right now, Medicaid is heavily auditing private practices, and there's a lot of people who believe that isn't going to happen to them. Eventually, I believe it will. There are a lot of us right now, so they don't probably have the manpower to get to everybody quickly, but I have clinicians reaching out to me very frequently. A handful of my friends just recently called to tell me that they got the call from Medicaid and they're getting audited. So, the other insurance companies audit as well, right? So that's the other thing. If you take 5 insurances like my group does, that's 5 different companies that you can get audited by. So do your trainings.
Thank you so much. I feel like you've done, even in this conversation, an amazing job breaking down something that seems
Thank
so
you.
overwhelming. And I know that we got some amazing feedback last time you trained with us. So
That's so good to hear.
yeah.
It was a good turnout. I think it maxed out. And so we had 25 people, and in this time we're accepting 35. So yeah, I was really honored. Just inquired if I could be a trainer, and you guys were really open to it, and the turnout was exciting. You guys were great, and yeah, it was a great experience, and I'm looking forward to the upcoming one.
And thank you so much for speaking with us today and kind of breaking it down a bit more and letting people know what to expect when they attend your training.
You're welcome, and thank you so much for having me.
Links will be in the description to learn more about Shalyn and sign up for her training, Clinical Documentation, on January 24th. Check out our links below to keep up with us at the Connecticut Women's Consortium. Thank you for tuning in today, and we'll see you next time.